morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you so much, John and Lloyd, for such a beautiful song. And I think it is perfect for what we're about to talk about because we are getting ready to dive in deep. And I hope after today's discussion that it helps you find a deeper sense of love and a sweeter sense of life. And I'm so excited to be starting off and kicking off September with Divine Order, because as you will see, there is divine order. So before we start, I would like everyone to close your eyes, take a few deep cleansing breaths, and go inside to where your inner wisdom is, your knowledge, and your understanding. And take that space and let it grow within inside of you. And then bring it forward to the present, to the here and now. And from this space is where I would like to begin our discussion today. So I will start by posing a question. Have you ever met somebody that you absolutely needed to know? Have you ever met someone and things just clicked and it was like you were two perfect puzzle pieces that fit together? You may have been drawn to them forcefully, or it's like you guys have known each other all along. You might not be able to explain in words what it is you're feeling, why you have to get to know them, why things just work so well. For me, I was very blessed to have that experience when I met my husband. There was something innate in me that needed to know him, that said, Breanne, you have to get to know him. He is going to be wonderful in your life. And he is. And I would say that if you've had that experience, that's your soul recognizing another familiar soul. Recognizing that you have a past together, that you have a future together, and that you very well have purpose together. And we've all heard the old saying, people are in our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And I would say, yes, that is absolutely true. People are in our lives because we have a past with them. We have a future with them, and we have purpose with them. Even if it is for a season, and even if it is for a lifetime. And your soul recognizing a familiar soul kind of speaks to reincarnation in multiple lives. And these concepts, they are not new and have been discussed many times, sometimes even here in this very church. But what I want to talk to you today is about what happens in between those lives. What happens between after we pass and when we're reincarnated, and how can that affect us and help us here in this lifetime. Next slide, please. So several years ago, I actually came across a book called Journey of Souls, and it's a case study of Life Between Lives by Dr. Michael Newton. And to give you a little bit of background, Dr. Newton was a counselor and hypnotherapist who specialized in hypnosis and age regression to determine the origins of trauma and pain for his clients. And one day he had a client come into his office, I would say by divine appointment, who had a lifetime of chronic pain. And doctors that he had seen weren't able to explain it, they weren't able to fix it. So Dr. Newton took him under hypnosis and began regression to find the cause of that pain. And before he knew it, his patient was reliving a life of a World War I soldier that had been killed by a bayonet in France. And what happened in that office that day sparked 30 years of Life Between Lives hypnotherapy with his clients. Now, Dr. Newton's clients, they were men and women. They were of all ages. They were of varying different faith bases, and they were of different levels of faith and commitment to faith. But what he found was that his clients were explaining the same things to to the point where at times they used the same words and the same phrases, excuse me, even though they didn't know each other. They explain the same steps along the way that we go through, that our soul goes through. They explain this same environment that many would call heaven. And they even explain that we have soul guides or spirit guides that help us not only in heaven, but here when we're living this life right now. When I took a look at what his clients were saying and reread it, and tried to look at it through the eyes of the basic principles of unity, I was pleasantly surprised that I could see all of them in there in some way, shape, or form. And that's one of the reasons why I have them up here. I want you to look at them, I want you to read them, and I want you to think about them as I go through this talk, and I want you to see if you see any of them in there. Now, what Dr. Newton's clients started off by saying is that after we pass, we are greeted by our loved ones who have also passed. And this is not a new concept. There are many near-death experience books out there that talk about this. But what one of his clients described was how they greeted each other and how they hugged as souls. And when you're a soul, you're not solid like you are when you're human, you're more ethereal. And what this client described was the two souls intertwining and swirling around each other. And I just thought that that imagery was so beautiful, and it hit me very deep in my truth. Because I know there are many times where I go to hug my loved ones, and I feel like I physically can't get them close enough. And I now know that that's just most likely my soul missing that ability to be able to do that in the here and now. And next time you hug your loved ones, think about that imagery of swirling around each other, intertwining with one another, and see if it changes how that hug feels for you, or even the person that you're hugging. So after we are greeted by our loved ones, we go to this place of healing where our souls are cleansed. Because being here on earth can be quite taxing and quite tiring for our soul. There's a lot of work that we're doing. And after that, we move on to what many would call a judgment phase or a review of our lives. Some clients even described it in front of a board of elders, basically. And I know that sounds super intimidating, but it was described as anything but. It was described as overwhelmingly supportive. Ironically, not judgmental, no punishment. And it was truly a starting point to reflect on the life that you had just lived. Where had things gone right? Where had you misstepped? What could you have done to do things differently? And after this judgment and reflection is when our souls get to move on to heaven. And after hearing it described, I would like to call it home. So many of his clients were overwhelmed with so much joy and so much relief to be back. They were so excited. And what they described was this vastness that was full of hundreds of thousands of souls, but yet not a one of them were a stranger. You knew everybody at different varying levels. Everyone was connected, and there was this foundational oneness that existed. And not only were we all connected to each other, we were all connected to a higher power that many of us would describe and call God. And on top of all of this, you can communicate telepathically. So if there's someone way off in the vastness that I can sense, that I want to say hi to, that I want to communicate with, all I have to do is think about it. I don't have to move. I can do it in my mind. And I just thought that that was a very interesting piece. Dr. Newton's clients also talk about, Dr. Newton's clients also talked about a hierarchy of souls, where you have your new souls that are new and young and haven't really done a lot of lives, and all the varying levels to get to those that are advanced and have so much knowledge, so much connectedness, so much wisdom. And the way that you progress through these hierarchies is by learning lessons. And by learning lessons, you have to go through challenges. And you do that right here on earth, when you're in your human body. Also, while you're in heaven, you are part of a soul circle or a soul family. And I loved this part. It's a smaller group of souls that you traverse your multiple lives with together. In one life, they may be your husband, they may be your brother, your cousin, a best friend, and it changes. But we help each other out. It's a supportive group. And while we're in heaven, I got that, yes, part of it was to rest and rejuvenate, but it was also, again, to look back, to learn, to figure out what challenges we need to take on next, where we need to go next. And everyone in our soul circle helps us with those things. And like Dr. Newton's clients explained, we have our spirit guides there and our teachers, and they are helping and guiding us along the way as well. Now, once you're in heaven for a little while, eventually it's time to come back and reincarnate into a human body. And this process was not explained as something that's done willy-nilly. It was definitely explained as something that is a collaborative process between you and your teachers, you and your soul family. You have to decide, you have to have a plan for what you're going to tackle when you come back to Earth. And you discuss this with your group because you make pacts with one another. I'm going to help you with this lesson, you help me with that lesson. Not only that, but you're going to make an agreement on how you're going to recognize each other when you're here in this lifetime. Because remember, you're a soul that has all this connectedness, all this wisdom and knowledge, and you're going to be inside of a human body that at least for some part of their life is not going to be consciously aware that you were there. So how are you going to recognize one another? And these signs are so simple. How somebody laughs, how somebody smiles, a twinkle in their eye, how it feels when you hug them, how they smell, how they tell a joke. Simple things. After reading this book, I actually had this discussion with my husband. And without a doubt, I know that my sign to him was my laugh, and his sign to me was his smile. And even while we're here on this earth and living this life, we get glimpses of our past lives. We get glimpses of that knowledge and of these messages that our spirit guides are sending us, and we do that through a multitude of ways. Prayer is a way. Meditation is a way. Dreams are a way. And I know plenty of people here have had experiences with all three of those things where you have a revelation, you have an aha moment. Things feel so real because they are. Even our thoughts. Our thoughts help us connect to that inner wisdom and understanding. And if you're getting a repeating message in your life, that might be your spirit guide trying to tap in and give it to you. Also, our challenges we get glimpses of. Many times in people's lives, we have a challenge that repeatedly shows itself. It may present itself differently, be called something differently, dress up differently, but when you peel back those layers of what that challenge really is at the root of it, it's the same thing showing up in your life over and over. It could be lack of self-worth, lack of confidence, taking care of my health, learning how to balance things, any number of things it could be. And if that's happening, you might want to pay attention because that's probably a challenge that you are here to learn from and have that lesson learned from in this lifetime. You may say, Breanne, that's great to have all that knowledge of what goes on, but how in the world does that help me here and now? I don't get it. And I feel the best way to illustrate that is to conclude with a personal story. Some of you may know, and many of you may not, but my dad actually has Alzheimer's. And a little over 3 years ago, our life was kind of turned upside down. My mom and dad were driving home from an out-of-state trip, and shortly before the house, my dad looked at my mom and said, "Whose house are we going to, yours or mine?" And my mom, very confused, looked at him and said, we're married, we're going to our house. And my dad looked at her and went, married? When the heck did that happen? 40 years ago. At that point in time, it had been about 40 years that they had been married. And what followed was me, my husband, and my brothers being there, being on call, basically to help my mother and my dad through the moments that he went squirrely or things just weren't going right. And in the beginning, my dad actually tried to throw my mom out of the house repeatedly. He would look right at her and go, my wife is on her way home, you need to leave. And if anybody here has ever dealt with anybody with Alzheimer's, there is no logic button. There is no reasoning. And those were very difficult times. Fast forward to now, my dad is actually in an assisted living facility, and my mom lives with one of his brothers and his brother's wife. And although things have worked out wonderfully for as best as it can be for the situation, this is not a life that my mom ever even dreamed that she would have at all. When this all first happened, I had a very unexpected reaction that I just didn't see coming, and I had a very strong, what I would call mama bear reaction for my mom. I wanted to protect her, I wanted to save her, because she was going through so many drastic challenges and changes, and so much heartbreak at this time. And it could have easily eaten me up. I could have easily focused on all of the things that I couldn't do for her. Instead, I was able to realize that she is on her own journey, and good, bad, or ugly, this is part of it. That she has lessons to learn through this, that I have lessons to learn through this experience. And that her father, or my father and her, made this pact long before they were ever here. My mom has also gone through, as you can imagine, some incredibly difficult times, moments, and heartbreaking situations. And through it all, it is not lost on her either that they made this pact before they were here. That my dad said, I will make this sacrifice for you so that you can learn these lessons, so that your soul can elevate. And she tries her best, and she does a darn good job of making sure not only that she takes care of my dad with dignity and does the best that she can for him, but also to work on those incredibly difficult lessons that she's learning so that my dad's sacrifice doesn't go wasted and that they don't have to repeat this in any lifetime in the future. Having this knowledge of what goes on in our life between lives, what happens with our souls and the paths that we make, has taken the circumstances that hundreds of thousands of people have unfortunately gone through, are going through, and will go through. That is incredibly difficult and heartbreaking, and still is for us at times. But it has given us purpose. It has given it hope. And it has allowed us to know, trust, and actually see in certain moments that God is part of this too. So I would encourage all of you to, sometime in the future, take a look back at your life, at the people in it, the situations that you've gone through, and see if maybe they're part of your soul circle. Maybe that was a life-changing lesson that you learned that's going to help you elevate in the next life. And keep it in mind for the future and see how it can change your circumstances.